Welcome to the Local Business Show. Seth Green is a nationally recognized marketer who is the nation's foremost authority on growing local businesses through direct response marketing podcasts, and the only person to be nominated 3 times for the GKIC Dan Kennedy Marketer of the Year Award. Seth will be joined by a capable cohort of co-hosts who are each local business marketing experts in their own right. On the podcast, Seth and his co-hosts brings together small business owners and other local business authorities to share with you their inspiring stories of how they started their local business, how they serve their local business clients, how they grow their local business, and how you can too. And now, here's your host, Seth Green.
Hello, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jay McFarland, and I'll be your podcast host. I work with Les's Results Pathfinder team at Umbrella Local. Now, Les's team specializes in accounting and bookkeeping professionals. Now, our guest today is Mark Stone. He is the managing partner of Sales Tax Defense LLC. It's a firm he founded back in 2008. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today.
And Jay, thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, so just do me a favor. Tell me a little bit about yourself and your background.
Well, I'm a CPA, but very different from what a lot of CPAs do. Is I don't do any kind of income tax consulting. I don't do any kind of bookkeeping or financial statements. Myself and my entire practice is exclusively focused on doing sales tax consulting. I kind of got my start by being a sales tax auditor for New York State and going out and asking businesses for money. And then for the past 20 years or so, 25 years already, I'm getting a little bit older, I've been representing businesses when the government asks them for sales tax so they can pay a little bit less, or how to advise people to structure things the right way so they don't get bills from the government just for sales tax.
Oh, that's fascinating. I didn't realize that sales tax needed a defender.
That's true, but that happens to be me.
So if I'm a company that I feel that I'm being overcharged or that the accounting is messed up for what the government is asking for, you're the guy to call.
Right. Or let's say you have a podcast and you have to buy all this, I'll call it radio equipment and headsets and electronic equipment. Depending on your state that you're in, a lot of states have exemptions for broadcast equipment. So you might fall into that. So you might say to me, Mark, I'm out in Utah. Does Utah have an exemption for that? And then I could look into it for you and see if you should be paying sales tax on your equipment. And if you are, get you a refund of that money. Or if you're about to buy new equipment, tell you how to legally purchase that equipment without paying sales tax on it.
Oh, that's fascinating. I honestly had no idea. How does one get into such a specialized line of work, just defending sales tax?
Well, growing up, I wanted to actually be an astronaut or an F-14 fighter pilot. So this was like the next best thing when that didn't work
Yeah,
out.
they're right in a line.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was working as a waiter in college, catering hall. And the bartender there was a New York State income tax auditor who was moonlighting on weekends at this catering hall. And I was graduated from college with my accounting degree. And he said, Mark, why don't you take a state test to see if you can be an auditor? And the market was a little bit tight at the time that I was graduated from college in 1992. So I took this state test and I scored pretty well on it. And the way it works in New York State is they have to hire in each county based off who scored highest on the list. So I live in New York on Long Island. At the time, I lived in Nassau County. So I was eligible for the job in Nassau County rather than having to commute maybe into Manhattan or relocate upstate New York. So it was a great, easy logistical opportunity for me. So I took my first job out of college being a New York State sales tax auditor. And I worked there for a couple of years, as I was saying, doing sales tax audits on businesses. But the early 90s was a bad economic time for New York State. So they came out after I was there for about 3 years with the budget, which was retroactive 4 years. And the budget was a 0% raise, a 0% raise, a $200 bonus, and a $400 bonus over the 4-year period. And I said, that's just not going to work for me for, that type of advancement opportunity for the rest of my life. So I left the state and I went to work at a couple different public accounting firms, worked many more hours, worked much harder than I did for the state, but I made more money. And I worked for different people for about 10 years, 2 of Long Island's larger accounting firms over that 10-year period. And then after being at these large accounting firms for 10 years, I decided to go into business and open up my own practice, doing exactly what I was doing at those firms. I was working on their clients doing sales tax consulting. I started my own practice doing sales tax consulting.
Well, it sounds to me like because of your experience as an auditor, you have some pretty fierce experience to help your clients out.
It's funny. It sounds that way. And I know the administrative process from being an auditor, but actually from representing my clients, I've done so much more work, so much more reading, so much more research, so much more creative thinking about how to look at things. That's actually helped me do a better job than working for the government. A great example of that is, I do work for some manufacturers. There's a lot of manufacturing exemptions related to sales tax. And people think of manufacturing as a conveyor belt, the good old fashioned assembly line that Ford is building Model Ts on. But that's not really how things work anymore. You have lots of different spot processes, one piece here, one piece there. But maybe you have a forklift in the middle that moves equipment from conveyor belt A to conveyor belt B. Well, that forklift actually now qualifies as manufacturing equipment because it's in the middle of the process. And a lot of things like that I never would have thought of working for the government. When you stop working for the government and you have to put on the opposite hat and say to a client, how can I save you money? And what does the law say? And how you can really show that a client's process fits in the law so an exemption applies. I've gotten really much, much better from doing that than actually, the government just tells you to go out and charge money. You don't think about how to save people money working for the government. So it's actually been a combination of knowing just what paperwork to file from working for the government, and then how to think representing clients is actually the more important part.
It's fascinating. I'm just curious, is your type of service something that a lot of companies use, or is it more specialized?
Well, I'd like to say it's something that a lot of companies should use. But a lot of people don't even give it any thought. Everybody thinks about income tax and they would say, probably as I just said to you, is there a broadcasting exemption for sales tax in Utah? And probably until that moment, you had never given it any thought.
You're exactly right.
So a lot of that comes up, and there's a broadcasting exemption in New York. Like I said, I don't know off the top of my head if there's one in Utah, but that's the kind of things I do for a client that have a 15-minute discussion. What do you do? And then maybe it's worth looking into. And maybe it's not worth looking into. If the only thing you bought is a $100 headset, well, that's $8 in sales tax. We're not looking into something for $8.
Right.
But, there's things like in New York, there's a lot of recording studios for musicians and artists and things like that. And they buy tens of thousands of dollars of recording equipment. And all of that recording equipment is exempt from sales tax. And if they never gave that any thought, they might have just overpaid $5,000 or $10,000 in sales tax. That a 2 or 3 hour discussion with me and a little bit of research saves them $10,000 on their new purchase and saves them $10,000 every couple of years when they replace that equipment.
Well, I love that.
The laws don't really change that much.
Yeah, I love that. And that's got to have an impact on their decision making. If they know that in advance going in, that affects what type of equipment they're going to purchase, what their spend is going to be, their budgeting, everything. If they have no idea, they don't realize that they're spending more money than they need to.
Yeah, and generally that money goes right to the bottom line because there's no other associated cost with it. You're just paying 8 or 9% less for your equipment.
Yeah, I love that. Do you just focus on Long Island, or do you really look into Utah and other states?
Yeah, no, we actually do a lot of multi-state work, probably as much multi-state work as we do in New York, because we have a lot of New York clients and they go to expand into another state and they say, all right, I know what the rules are. I've been operating in New York for the past 20 years, but what do I do in and wherever it might be? And we do a lot of work in the tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, but then we also do a lot of work, Florida, Texas, California, Illinois, the bigger states where people go to as their first expansion, their second expansion, that kind of stuff. And then we have some large clients that really are doing business in, we have one client that's doing business in 45 different states. So you got to know the rules everywhere or have a familiarity with the rules. And then we have research tools that we subscribe to that we use to look up things to get black and white answers.
Yeah, I'm curious as I'm just learning about your specialty. Do you have a lot of competition? Are there a lot of people who focus in on sales tax the way that you do?
No, actually, very few people do what we do. There's a couple of law firms in New York that we compete with, a couple of other boutique accounting firms that we compete with. But really, the biggest challenge I say we face is getting people to think about sales tax. I always call it the stepchild of taxation. Everybody, again, thinks it's income tax. nobody thinks of sales tax. But the example that I always like to give is if you have a company that's doing $10 million in revenue, but only has a $500,000 profit on that $10 million of revenue, if you're in a 40% income tax bracket, which is a high income tax bracket, you're paying $200,000 of income tax on that $500,000 of profit. A $10 million company that should be charging 8% sales tax is looking at an $800,000 sales tax bill, but nobody thinks about it.
Right. I was sitting here thinking, what types of companies would benefit from your services? It doesn't seem like there would be a limit. It seems to me like every company should be calling you before they make any types of purchases because they never know.
Absolutely. And a lot of non-traditional companies that you would say, why do they have to, talk to me? Tremendous benefits from little things. So the one piece of advice that I give every single company is that every single business, without any exceptions whatsoever, should be filing an annual sales tax return in any state they do business. And a lot of people say to me, well, why do I need to waste the time? I'm a doctor. I'm a radiologist. A radiologist in almost every state doesn't have to charge sales tax on medical services. But they buy these, or they lease these $1 million MRI machines, CAT scan machines, other types of equipment like that. If you file a sales tax return, the government has 3 years to come back to you and say that you made a mistake. If you don't file a sales tax return, the government really has an open-ended period, and they come back generally for 7 years. So if you have a radiologist that leases an MRI machine from an out-of-state company, a lot of times from GE, located somewhere in the Midwest, they might not be charging the radiologist sales tax on that lease payment, but generally you have to pay sales tax on all leases of equipment. But since they're not a New York company, they're not charging it. If you file this annual zero sales tax return and the government comes in and audits you, they charge you the back taxes for 3 years. If you're just not filing the return, they come in, they charge you the taxes going back 7 years. And of course, they charge interest and penalties. So the bill over 7 years is literally 3 times the amount of the bill over 3 years. So by just doing a little tweak to your practices, filing a return that probably takes 15 minutes a year to prepare, you might save yourself $100,000 or $200,000 worth of exposure. So,
yeah, it really sounds like it. And then if I haven't filed it, how far back can I go to protect myself?
Well, you can go back all open periods. Most states have something called a voluntary disclosure, where you go to them and say, listen, I made a mistake. I didn't file returns. My returns were wrong. My bookkeeper made a math mistake on the returns, whatever it might be. And in exchange for you voluntarily coming forward and correcting the returns and paying what you owe on those corrected returns, they almost always agree to a limited look back of no more than 3 years. They agree to waive all penalties. Sometimes they reduce interest. Even if you did something intentionally wrong in the returns, very often as part of a voluntary disclosure agreement, they'll agree to forego any kind of fraud or criminal penalties that could be associated with it because you're coming clean and you haven't been caught. So it's a great way to get things cleaned up.
Yeah, so are there a lot of companies out there that have this potential liability looming and they don't realize that it's out there?
Absolutely. Because most companies think they're doing their stuff right. Most companies aren't intentionally doing something wrong, but that's the whole point. The auditor comes in and says, no, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, and they give you a bill. The government never just comes in and says, well, you should be doing this, fix it. They say, here's your bill, this is what you did wrong. So there's a lot of opportunity really to make people rethink things by having a simple conversation with them. And really I'll say the most tragic sales tax thing, if there's such a thing that you can do, is if you should be charging sales tax and you're not charging sales tax, what happens is the government comes in, if they catch you, they make you, the business, pay the sales tax out of your own pocket that you should have collected from other people. So why in the world you'd want to pay someone else's sales tax is beyond me. So that's really, if someone can just say to you, wait, you should be charging sales tax on this. You should be phrasing it this way. You should be doing your invoices this way. So when the government knocks on your door and it's bulletproof, I mean, really a lot of value for that and saves a lot of aggravation and maybe a lot of money.
Yeah, I know with the internet, especially when it first came out, sales tax was not being charged on purchases over the internet, and then a lot of states looked at that. Do states still really vary across the board on whether or not they charge a sales tax for internet purchases?
That's a super timely question. So what happened, 1992, there was a Supreme Court case. Quill was the person involved, the company involved, that the Supreme Court said you have to physically be in a state in order for that state to be allowed to tax you. That got revisited in 2018. A lot of people may have heard of it. The Supreme Court, it was South Dakota versus Wayfair. And the Supreme Court reversed itself and said you no longer physically have to be in a state for a state to tax you. So all of those companies that were, Amazon is the perfect example, was located just out in the West, on the West Coast, and selling into the other 49 states and not charging sales tax. And of course, things have changed with Amazon over the years, but that loophole has gone away. That's really the way to say it. So because of the Wayfair decision, basically every state in the country now says, if you sell more than $100,000 into our state in the last 12 months, you need to register and collect our state sales tax and turn it over to us. So it's been a really dramatic change. It goes back now to 2018, so it's almost 3 years old, that change. And the states are really going to start auditing people now to make sure that, you're in compliance. So not only does a Utah company have to worry about Utah knocking on its door, but they have to worry about South Dakota knocking on their door, California knocking on their door, because all these different states want all of these companies to collect taxes for them and turn it over, because the states are obviously very good at spending money. So the more they can get in, the more they can spend.
Yeah, they want their money and they're going to get their money. I imagine this makes it very hard for the online checkout systems. They have to know every tax rate in every single state and factor that in and calculate it properly, correct?
Not only does the software need to know that, but you need to know the language that the software speaks. And when I say that, let me explain that. A very common thing to sell online is clothing. But then what the heck is clothing? Because states define it very differently. So you get into, all right, a shirt, a jacket, that's clearly clothing. What about cufflinks? What about a pocketbook? What about a watch? What stops being clothing? What starts being jewelry? Some states have lines in the sand that they draw. New York draws a line at $110. If an article of clothing is $110 or more, it's a luxury item and there's tax on it. Under $110, it's a necessity and there's no tax on it. So you go to the store and you buy a suit, and a suit comes a jacket and a pair of pants for $200. Taxable, not taxable. In New York, that's taxable. You go to the same store and you buy separates, a jacket for $100 and a pair of pants for $100. That's not subject to sales tax.
Wow.
So even when you're setting up the software may have, in all seriousness, 50 or 70 codes for clothing, because you have to code all of your stuff correctly for the software so it knows how to tax it in every state.
Wow.
Otherwise, if you just say clothing, it may check off. Like a big question I get now, are masks clothing? And listen, they're fabric and they're decorated and they have sequins on them and they have faces on them, they have dragons on them, they have all this nonsense on these masks. Are they clothing? New York says they're protective equipment, and protective equipment is not clothing. But that's a New York rule. Another crazy rule is whether candy and cookies are taxable. So in New York, chocolate-covered pretzels are considered candy, and they are subject to sales tax because New York says candy is subject to sales tax. In California, chocolate-covered pretzels are considered a bakery item, and bakery items are an essential and therefore not subject to sales tax. Same exact item, two different tax treatments. So again, you have to really be careful with your coding depending on what you're doing. And there's those types of crazy rules for almost every business, unless you sell very typical tangible items like kitchen tables and chairs. There's not a lot of variance in that kind of stuff.
Wow, I didn't realize. I knew it was complicated, but I didn't have any idea it was that complicated. And I just can't imagine, because every year, every state legislature meets together and they obviously love to change and add things all the time. So keeping up on it must be, well, obviously it's a full-time job.
Yes, exactly. And, you have all these different special interest groups that lobby, one state over another. And then they threaten to move businesses, and it's going to hurt this industry. And for whatever reason they do what they do, you're right, there's always changes. So you have to always kind of be looking. which goes back to companies inadvertently doing something wrong. You were doing it right 10 years ago. You haven't changed a thing, but the government changed something on you and you didn't even know about it because, I'm only, one of a few crazy people that read these changes as they come out because that's what I do for a living.
I'm curious, do you have like a favorite success story, client success story that illustrates what you do and why it's so important?
I do have a favorite story. So I have a professional sports franchise as a client. And in New York, tickets to most sporting events are considered admission charges and are subject to sales tax. But this sports franchise has luxury boxes like a lot of sports franchises do. And actually, to get the luxury box, there's two fees you pay. You pay a fee for the box itself, the space that the boxes you get, because you get a room. And you also need to buy a ticket for each chair in the box, which is how they keep track of how many people go to the event. So, and there's two charges for it. And so this business was sending sales tax to the government for their charges for the box and for the tickets. But in New York, the rental of just a space is not subject to sales tax. So what we were able to do was there was an audit assessment for about $1 million on this business, and they had paid in some sales tax on these boxes. And we were able to get the audit assessment canceled and get them the $700,000 they paid in on the boxes back to them. So it was a $1.7 million swing. And then I was able to get tickets from them for a very special sporting event, which I took my kids to. And that was a wonderful treat.
That is very cool. So can I ask you, I can guess, what do you like best about what you do?
Believe it or not, what I actually like best, besides, of course, helping clients, because, when you actually get to save somebody money, when they're on a smaller business, they're concerned about going out of business or being bankrupted by a liability or it ruining their financial lives, because sales tax can really do that to you. The part I like best is actually like reading the law, interpreting the law, finding a nuance in it that, this luxury box is considered space rental rather than admission to a place of amusement, that the forklift on the conveyor belt is actually part of the conveyor belt, and trying to be a little creative with taxation. It's not a lot of times that you get a chance to be creative with the tax law. So that's the part of the job that I enjoy, and talking to the client and learning about their business. Because until you have a conversation with someone and say, well, what is it that you do? What equipment do you buy for your business? How do you use that equipment? Then you can't even apply the law to something until you learn about somebody's business. And that's the interesting part. Just reading the code is.
Well, but it sounds like there's a real like puzzle solving, like you're kind of decoding a mystery or trying to, connect dots based upon what you see. I've never thought of accounting in that way, but I can see how you use the word creative, and I can see how that side of you, that creative side of you, is a real benefit to your clients.
Yes. Yeah, you describe it very, very well.
Yeah. So I'm curious, how has the pandemic affected your business model?
It's been a problem. There's no way around it. Of course, we had to follow the rules laid out in New York, which was we shut us down for a while. We tried working from home, but we have a very collaborative environment. And even with Zoom and a lot of other technology things, and of course, being able to sign in remotely to our server and stuff like that, it's not the same thing as working in an office together. It's just not as collaborative. In addition to that, the government has also really shut down. The offices are not closed. The offices are not open. The auditors are working from home. They're impossible to reach because you call them, they're in the office now. I think they're in the office, what did they say? They're in 10% of the time. They're either in one morning a week or one afternoon a week. The rest of it is they're working from home. There's no way to reach them because the auditors don't want to give out their personal cell phone numbers, which I understand why. Most of the time they would be giving out to a taxpayer that they're going to be asking for money, and they don't want someone calling them up in the middle of the night and threatening them.
Yeah.
So I see why they do that, where on my end, as somebody's accountant, somebody's advocate, I give them my cell phone number, and my clients call me usually at reasonable times, so I'm able to be reached. But the government, to try to resolve something, is not so easy to be reached. In addition, we do a lot of moving a lot of paper to show somebody, here's the invoice that they paid sales tax on for the forklift that they're entitled to a refund. But the paper we use may be voluminous. You may be looking at, in all seriousness, 2,000 or 3,000 pieces of paper that have to go back and forth.
Wow.
So getting it scanned is not that big of a deal. Again, that's technology. You run it through a copy machine at high speeds. But then communicating with someone, here's a 2,000 page file. We need to go through this together, where normally you would sit at a conference room table and show them, the 200 pages out of the 2,000 pages that you want them to see, is both very difficult and more time consuming. You can't even really put Post-its on things when you scan things. I mean, it's just, when you have a box with Post-its on it sticking out, sometimes it's a lot easier when you sit down with somebody to do that. So the government is just doing a lot less work. So it takes forever to get something resolved. A lot of people's businesses were partially closed because of COVID. So they can't even get into their offices. Their bookkeepers can't go and pull invoices from me so I can show somebody what something is. And as great as Zoom and Microsoft Teams and these technologies are, it's not as good as sitting down with somebody and shaking somebody's hand. It's not as good as, if you need to go out with a client and really understand their business and have lunch with them and talk about something over lunch. It's good, but it's not the same. So it has just dramatically slowed things down a lot.
Wow. Are you seeing any changes now that we have vaccines coming along, and I feel like there's light at the end of the tunnel? Is it lightening up for you yet, or are you still about the same place?
For my firm itself, we're back in the office. Most of us are vaccinated. Luckily, the space we have is everybody pretty much has their own office. So, as far as the 6-foot rule, everybody has a lot more than 6 feet. Everybody has a door they can close. We wear masks and hand sanitizer and temperature test, all that. I don't want to call it nonsense, but all of that procedure with stuff. And we've been lucky. Nobody here has really gotten sick or anything like that. But the flip side, I'm seeing there's still just a lot of rules and regulations with things, a lot of resistance to opening things up. The government has really clamped down on things. I have a lot of restaurant clients, and they've been shut down, or their seating requirements have been dramatically reduced. Yes, they allowed outdoor seating, but in New York, we have cold winters. And we're just coming out of the winter. People don't really want to go to a restaurant and sit outside in 40-degree weather. I mean, you may have a space heater blowing on you, but that's not really keeping you warm in a tent outside when you're going out to eat. So a lot of these things have been hurt. A lot of my clients that are in the service industry had some type of entertainment. They had a singer come in or a catering call, and they've been shut down from that. Or, where they were having 250-person parties, they're allowed a 50-person party. That hurts them. That hurts business, that hurts their ability to hire consultants to advise them on things. So there's been a lot of damage done. And then, yes, we're starting to open up, but I still feel from a lot of people, a lot of COVID hesitancy, I'll call it that. People are still afraid to go out. Even when you sit with friends that everybody's vaccinated and you sit down at a table with them, like, do you take your mask off? Do you not take your mask off? The kids, I have children, they go to school. I pick them up at school, and they get into the car and they're still wearing their mask. But we're going to live in a house together. What point does that end? I think a lot of people are shell-shocked from a lot of this, and it's going to take time for people to get over it emotionally.
Oh, I totally agree with you. I mean, is there a time when we return to shaking hands, or are we doing the elbow shake for the rest of time, or hugging people? Or I don't think any of us know what the long-term ramifications are of this, besides the way that it's impacted your business.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, sadly, a lot of psychological damage to people and to children, and, kids that should have been in school socializing and playing and stuff like that. By me, they were homeschooled for a while, and then they went back. They called it hybrid, one day on, one day off. They just recently returned to school full time. But rather than even having tables in the lunchroom, they sit at individual desks in the lunchroom with a plexiglass barrier around each desk. Whereas, like, I remember being in middle school and sitting with my friends and acting like an idiot and going outside and playing and running around, and a lot of hesitancy with that, and, my daughter has friends that she hasn't physically seen in a year now. I mean, they do, I don't even know what they do, FaceTime and Chat House and whatever stuff they're on together. But that's not the same as going and sitting on swings and playing together.
No, I totally agree. Although I definitely agree that there's a mental health issue. I also think about how this pandemic would have gone just 30 years ago or 40 years ago with no Zoom, no FaceTime, none of this stuff. How would you do remote classes? You couldn't. I think all things considered, the fact that the economy has kept moving forward, it's all thanks to a lot of this great technology.
Yes, I mean, it definitely made strides. The historically incredibly short period of time it took them to come up with multiple vaccines is astonishing. That's a tremendous scientific breakthrough. But I think also, unfortunately, we gave a lot of people an opportunity to be overly scared. It was something to be afraid of, but life has to go on too. There's some risks involved with life. We didn't close the country when there was a polio epidemic, and a lot of people got badly hurt and killed from that. And definitely, listen, 500,000 or more people died in the US from COVID. So it's a very real thing. But it's so split the country as far as what you should do and what you shouldn't do.
Yes.
Maybe there was a better way, and I'm not smart enough to know what that better way was, but there was too much division from whatever they did. There had to be a better way to get a very similar result without really splitting the country like we did this past year.
I could not agree with you more. Typically, a national tragedy would unify us. I mean, like a September 11th unified us. I remember after September 11th, for a while, maybe it was only a couple of weeks, but we weren't Republicans or Democrats. We weren't different religions. We weren't different skin colors. We were one people united. And that's what typically would happen in a national tragedy. And I think that because of politics and the way they are today, as you pointed out, it became incredibly divisive instead of unifying. And that's unfortunate.
I agree with everything you just said.
Yeah. So tell me, Long Island, have you lived there your whole life? Were you born there?
Well, pretty much. I was born in Queens, and then when I was young, my parents moved out to Long Island to get out of an apartment building into a house, and I've been on Long Island my whole life since then.
So you must like it.
I'll say yes and no. I mean, I do like it. There's some very positive things about Long Island, but there's also some very negative things about Long Island. My brother lives in Atlanta, Georgia, so I have a very good comparison between the two regional areas. I've been down to Atlanta an awful lot. And then comparatively speaking, that housing prices in New York, on Long Island, and a couple of other places in the country are astronomically high compared to what I see my brother is able to afford for the same money in Georgia. A lot of the infrastructure in New York and the Northeast is really very old. I'm always astonished that you think of New York as the greatest city in the country, the biggest city in the country, and there's so much traffic and there's no way to get across any of the bridges. Things are so backed up. And then I go down to Georgia, and while they still have traffic, they have 6-lane highways, 7-lane highways in some places. And I'm here driving in the same road for 30 years, and there's the same potholes on the road for 30 years. And I'm like, why can't they get them fixed? They get them fixed elsewhere. So I have mixed feelings about New York. There's some really great things. Before they shut down the city, the arts and humanities in New York City were probably unrivaled. But there's a lot of negatives too, that the infrastructure is just really very old and they just can't seem to get it fixed the right way.
Interesting. Just a couple more questions for you while I've got you. If somebody's thinking about a career in accounting, what would you tell them? What advice would you give them?
Well, I think there's two different paths now in accounting. There's worker bees and there's partners. And there used to be a mentality that worker bees had to go up or out. And if your goal wasn't to be a partner, then ultimately that would lead to someone being let go because they weren't trying hard enough. I think over the past 10, maybe 15 years, that mentality has completely changed. Dramatically more women have entered the accounting workforce. While I very much believe that it's an equal job between a man and a woman to raise children, I'm a single father raising my children. Still traditionally, I think more women take on a larger burden of that compared to men. Again, not in all cases, and I'm not saying that's the way it should be. I raise my children very much so. But accounting firms have had to adapt and now allow, before COVID, a lot of people to work from home, a lot of people to work flexible hours, a lot of people to leave the office at 2:00 to go get children. And then with the understanding of that people will finish some work up at home, maybe 7, 8 o'clock at night to get that work done. And now it's okay to just be a worker and you're only going to put in 40 hours a week. And that's going to be your life and you'll make a reasonable living. You're certainly not going to get rich doing that, but you'll have a 9-to-5 job, or during tax season for a lot of accounting firms, 9 to 7 or 9 to 3 and then 6 p.m. to 9 p.m., something like that. And then there's an opportunity for people that really want to hustle for, the first 10 years of your career to put in 60-hour work weeks and make connections and do networking and develop clients and learn those skills of how to bring in business and become a partner and an owner at a firm and you won't get rich like, you're not going to be Elon Musk working at an accounting firm, but make a nice living so you can afford a nice car and a nice house and nice vacations and put your kids through school without, a lot of difficulty. So I think there's two different career paths and a lot of opportunity. If you look at the demographics of the accounting field, the average age of the accountant now is something like 55 in New York or something like that. We're not going to live forever. We're not going to work forever. So, a lot of opportunity for young people coming out of school that want to work. Not as glamorous as working on Wall Street, not the same bonuses they get as working on Wall Street, but not the same ups and downs. Wall Street's very cyclical. Accounting is very consistent because whether your client makes a lot of money or loses a lot of money, they still typically need a tax return done. They still typically need books done. They still typically need to file payroll tax returns. They still have to file sales tax returns. So that work is pretty consistent. So a lot less ups and downs on Wall Street, but less excitement if you're really into the market.
Interesting. Did any of your children follow you into accounting?
So my kids are not that old yet.
Oh, they're not there yet.
I have a 3-year-old little girl, and then I have a 12 and a 15-year-old. My 15-year-old, my son, is definitely, I guess they call it STEM now, science, technology, engineering, math, whatever the acronym stands for. He's looking at that kind of stuff now. I don't know where he's going to go. His current thought is he wants to be an astronomer, which I think is very interesting, but I'm not sure how that's going to pay the bills. So we'll have to have some more discussions when he's ready to look at colleges. Maybe an astronomy minor and something a little more practical, but maybe he'll go work at NASA and help send rocket ships to the moon or something like that. I don't know yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And then a 3-year-old, that's about my favorite age on the planet.
Yes, 3 going on 30. She's got an awful lot of opinions and likes to tell me what's right and what's wrong and very sure about things. And if you don't give her chocolate pudding, it's the end of the world. That's for sure.
But still cute and knows how to use those eyelashes to get what she wants.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I tell my kids. They're older. I'm like, you're not cute anymore. It doesn't work on me anymore.
Exactly. Although it probably still works. If you have a daughter and she says, Daddy, I need, then what do you need?
Yeah, absolutely.
Get away from
that. So is there anything else you would like to share with our listeners based upon anything we've discussed today?
Well, I had a terrific time this call. I do want to encourage people business-wise to think about sales tax. It's probably something that they haven't given thought to, but something that I've learned, especially now having, I'll say, not quite 2 generations of children, but having, a 10-year gap between it and talking about accounting. There really is something to be said for the ability to leave the office at 2 or 3 o'clock and go get your kids from school and then help them do homework or go to, whether it's my son's volleyball game or my middle daughter's track and field race or my 3-year-old soccer game, whatever it might be, and then take some work home with me. And, when the baby goes to sleep and the older kids doing their own homework, I do my homework too and finish things up for 2 hours. Where that was never allowed in accounting before, you had to stay in the office. It was always a race to see who could stay later. A lot of flexibility. It's really been a good life event for me and getting to see my kids' activities. So
I love to hear that. You've really opened my eyes when it comes to just sales tax accounting. And I love your passion for your field, but I also love your passion as a parent. It sounds like you've been able to achieve some work-life balance that others are probably still looking for.
I'd like to think so, although I have given up my fair amount of sleep to make that happen too.
Absolutely. Well, it's been such a pleasure getting to know you. Let's put out a pitch if anybody is interested in using your services, and I feel like most businesses should. How do they get a hold of you? How do they find out more information?
Well, my company has a website, www.salestaxdefense.com, salestaxdefense.com. You can give me a call in the office, 631-491-1500. My direct extension there is 11, 631-491-1500 extension 11. Or if you Google us on the web, Sales Tax Defense, hopefully we should come up as, your top hit or something very close to that. So, and we're happy to talk to anybody. Give me a call. I can talk to you for 15 minutes. There's no charge to talk to you for 15 minutes or so to see if we can even help you. And a lot of times I just say to somebody, all you have to do is this. All you have to do is get that piece of paper, and a problem goes away by literally getting them a single piece of paper from their customer.
Very good. Well, listen, it's been a real pleasure getting to know you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.